Discipline is usually sold as a gateway, a promise that once you get disciplined, everything opens up. Better execution, cleaner decisions, more confidence, more control. That framing is comforting and completely wrong. Discipline doesn't open doors, it closes them. It doesn't give you options, it removes them. Real discipline is not permission. It's restriction enforced so thoroughly that choice disappears. That's why people talk about discipline but resist living inside it. Freedom feels safe to the human brain. Optionality feels like protection. The idea that you can react, adjust, intervene, and override feels like intelligence. In trading, that instinct is lethal. The moment you equate freedom with safety, you've already sided with impulse over process. Rules feel threatening not because they are limiting, but because they expose something uncomfortable. Without restriction, you don't trust yourself. If you did, you wouldn't need the flexibility. Restriction exists for one reason, because under pressure, you are the risk, not the market, not volatility, not macro events, not spreads, slippage, or news. You. Every damaged equity curve traces back to a moment where freedom was exercised, a rule bent just this once, a setup taken early, a stop adjusted to give it room, a trade justified emotionally and labeled as logic after the fact. And none of it feels reckless in real time. That's the dangerous part. It feels reasonable, measured, adaptive, smart. Discipline fails not because traders act irrationally, but because they act rationally in service of emotion. This is why discipline cannot rely on judgment. Judgment is the first thing corrupted under pressure. The second you trust your discretion when emotions are active, discipline has already collapsed. It just hasn't shown up on the P&L yet. This is the trap. Discipline is imagined as empowerment, as something that makes you feel sharper, faster, more capable. In reality, discipline works only when it makes you feel constrained, contained, predictable, boring. If your rules still allow you to feel clever, they're too loose. If your system leaves space for interpretation, you haven't built discipline. You've built a negotiation table for emotion. Consistency is not produced by intention. It's produced by elimination. Elimination of choice, elimination of reaction, elimination of self-expression. Discipline isn't a personality trait. It's an environment, a closed system where the wrong actions are impossible, not resisted. That's why discipline feels uncomfortable, because it strips the emotional brain of its favorite weapon, the ability to intervene. And once intervention is gone, something else shows up. Resistance. Not logical resistance. Physiological resistance. Your nervous system pushing back against restriction itself. And that's where the real fight begins. Restriction feels threatening because your brain is built for survival, not consistency. The brain doesn't ask, is this optimal? It asks, do I have control right now? In trading, restriction removes control from the emotional mind. You can't jump in. You can't chase. You can't fix discomfort with action. So your nervous system panics. That panic doesn't show up as fear. It shows up as logic. I'm being too rigid. I need flexibility for conditions like this. This is still technically my setup. Those thoughts are not insight. They're withdrawal symptoms. You're cutting off dopamine access. Every impulsive trade gives relief, not profit. Relief. Relief from uncertainty. Relief from waiting. Relief from feeling irrelevant. While the market moves without you, restriction removes that relief. So your brain will fight it hard. This is why traders sabotage their own rules during drawdowns. Not because rules stop working, but because restriction becomes unbearable when confidence drops. The weaker your identity, the more freedom you demand. Strong operators crave limitation. Weak participants negotiate with it. The moment you start arguing with your rules, you're not being analytical, you're being exposed. Discipline requires you to tolerate being inactive, bored, and wrong without interference. That tolerance is not natural. It has to be enforced. That's why rules must be non-negotiable, not because you're dumb, because you're human. And humans are terrible decision makers under emotional pressure. Participants ask, what can I do right now? Operators ask, what am I allowed to do? That difference decides careers. Participants feel entitled to action. Operators feel obligated to restraint. Participants believe opportunity is constant. Operators know opportunity is rare. Restriction is how professionals filter noise from signal. If your rules allow frequent participation, your edge is diluted by design. Real edges are boring, sparse, selective, which means most of your time is spent not trading. This is where ego breaks, because not trading feels like incompetence to an insecure identity. So traders manufacture activity to feel relevant. They widen criteria. They add confluence. They reinterpret conditions, all in the name of experience. But experience doesn't come from repetition. It comes from controlled repetition. Doing the wrong thing 1,000 times doesn't build skill, it builds habit. Restriction forces statistical integrity. Same setup, same conditions, same execution. Anything else is experimentation, masquerading as discipline. If your rules let you adapt mid-trade, you're not disciplined. You're improvising under stress. And improvisation is where accounts bleed. Restriction isn't about safety. It's about data purity. If you can't say exactly why a trade belongs in your sample size, it doesn't. Professionals don't trade what could work. They trade what has earned permission. Restriction is how you earn the right to trust your results. Discipline is not something you perform. It isn't a behavior you switch on when you feel focused. It isn't a mindset you access on good days. And it isn't something you borrow from motivation. Discipline is who you default to when pressure removes comfort. That's the test. If discipline disappears during drawdowns, it was never discipline. It was confidence pretending to be control. Confidence collapses under pressure. Discipline does not rely on confidence. Motivation needs belief. Belief needs recent success. Success needs favorable conditions. It functions when results are flat, when confidence is damaged, when nothing feels clear. And that only happens when discipline lives at the identity level. You don't try to follow rules when they're identity bound. Trying implies effort. Effort implies debate. There is no debate. Rules aren't negotiated. They aren't reinterpreted. They aren't bent because today feels different. They are obeyed, not because they're perfect, but because they remove choice. And choice is where traders lose control. Choice invites emotion. Emotion invites bias. Bias invites justification. Justification destroys accounts. Restriction amputates that entire chain. The market doesn't reward intelligence or intuition. It rewards repeatable behavior. And repeatable behavior cannot survive inside wide systems. It only survives inside narrow boundaries that leave no room for personality. That's why resistance shows up. Because traders don't just trade markets, they trade their self-image. Restriction threatens that image. It removes the ability to feel clever under pressure. So the ego revolts, and this truth gets avoided. You don't need more discipline. You need fewer permissions, less freedom, less flexibility, less access to decision-making in real time. Because under pressure, you are the liability. That's biology, not weakness. Restriction isn't punishment, it's protection. Discipline doesn't make you feel better. It makes you consistent, and consistency feels boring until the account stops resetting and behavior finally stabilizes. Restriction isn't the cage, it's the exit.